Welcome to our Art Bite. I'm Sara. I'm a guide at the gallery, and today we're going to take a closer look at Frances Hodgkins' painting Wings Over Water. It's an oil-on canvas that she completed 1931-32. But first of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to recap some of her history. Frances, as you would remember, is perhaps our best-known expat artist. She was born in Dunedin, and she and her older sister Isabella, were taught painting by their father, the amateur artist William Hodgkins, and also went to the Dunedin School of Art. Isabel, who was considered talented, went on to marry a politician. Frances was considered to be dumb, but Frances was determined that art was her career. And she painted, she sold paintings, working towards paying a passage for herself to Europe, where she intended to study art. Well, she set sail in 1901 when she was 31. Her first landing in Europe was on Marseille, and she absolutely was blown away by the colour, the architecture, the bustle, and the very atmosphere of it all. And at that time she did a quick sketch. Well, she went on. She was peripatetic. She moved about 6 times a year. She was always poor. She wasn't in good health, but she was witty, intelligent, and energetic. And people loved her, particularly the young people, so that she always had somewhere to stay. She always had friends. And she devoted herself entirely to her art. Frances was in Paris in 1939, having decided to study she got a job at the Calarossi School of Art, and she decided to make Paris her home. But the war was announced, the Second World War. And she said, the women in the streets of Paris threw their pennies over their heads and ran round screaming, not the British and not the artists. We were subdued. Well, she went over from Paris to make her home in Cornwall. And she moved around Cornwall a lot. And to just take a step back, in 1931, she was offered a place to stay in Foy, on the Foy estuary. It wasn't quite right, so she crossed the river to the little village of Bodnik. And it's when she's staying there in Bodnik, in the nook, neither a rookery nor a cosy one, she said, that she painted Wings Over Water. But always Frances was improving and changing her work. From the early days of realism, she moved to playing with perspective, to playing with distances, to simplifying, and to totally rearranging things. She was looking for patterns. She was looking for compositions, not for realism. And we see this here. One of the things Frances did was that she was one of the first artists to paint a view through the window from the interior. And she usually framed this with the window frames or the drapery. Sometimes though, she was experimenting again. She would take a drapery seemingly hanging from the sky, bring it inside over the window frame and outside again. So constantly she was practicing, she was experimenting and developing her art. Now, here in Wings Over Water, she's painting from the interior. She has in front of her a heavy plank table in the foreground. And on it she has, and this was something else she did, she liked to use her favourite objects again and again. And we see it here, this compote with the blue lines around the top was something she used often. But here she's doing something different again. She's standing it on the table, but tilting the perspective so that we can see inside the compote to the spray of flowers that's there. To the right of the compote we have a favourite jug with cherries on it, something she used in many different compositions. And she seemed to have this library in her head of things she liked to use, and she used them when they fitted to create the composition she wanted. Typical of this is the arum lilies, which you see standing up at the bottom of the picture. These arum lilies have appeared before and will again. So she's looking out over the estuary of Foy, across a stream to the ferry house on the other side. Incidentally, this ferry house, at the time she was there, Daphne du Maurier and her father, Sir Gerald du Maurier, the actor and theatre manager, were living in the place at the time. Possibly Daphne was writing her Rebecca or My Cousin Rachel. Anyway, Frances, something else she does here, she simplifies the foreground. The bank on the other side and the stream beneath have been simplified to a band of colour, to two bands of colour. She has eliminated a staircase that is actually beside the ferry house. And along the river's edge we have the row of bollards, lights, a fence, and we have the path across to the ferry house. But the interesting thing that we have here is that she has taken that parrot, Rob's his name, he's the landlady's parrot. She's taken that parrot. He's apparently on a twig outside the window, but he's leaning right into the window to become the focal point of the painting with his beautiful red feathers and green. Incidentally, this parrot she blamed for using some bad language, as she called it, in a letter she wrote to a friend at one stage. At the time she was being stressed by decisions about which paintings she would include in an upcoming exhibition. And she said, I wish they'd make up There's Something Mind. Oh, she said, blame Rob on that. He teaches me bad language. Anyway, to me, I can see that as a frame she's used that stream of light on the water, on the glistening, sparkling waters of the estuary. And down the other side she's used the cliff as a frame for the painting. What I'd like to do now is take a step back a few months to the first painting that Frances Hodgkins did from this window. It was further back into the winter of 31, the colour is different. She's used the dark green and its complementary yellows to do this painting. I'll show it to you now. Can you see that? We've got the same table and we've got the windows, but this time she's left the windows in, framing the painting. We've got the balcony and Rob behaving himself outside the window with the cliffs on either side helping to frame the scene. Again, she's used objects that she liked to use and reuse, such as those shells, which we see her using in another painting she did later of a plate of fish. I haven't made a very good job of showing you that. There we are. There are the shells. And she's used those again. Another thing she used, and it's obvious in this piece here, she used a lot of gouache as well as oil, and she mixes all sorts of unconventional things to get her colours. Sometimes, because she's painted and over-painted, the texture, the surface texture is quite rough. I say she used unconventional things because she would choose material that was cheaper than the usual colouring matter for oils, and she would create all sorts of different colours. She mixed and mixed and mixed. Another thing we learn about her methods here is that she would, having decided on a composition, she would do paintings and sketches. She'd sit in front of it for days and she'd paint small parts of it. She'd draw them, she'd paint them, she'd draw them, until she had many different sketches and drawings. And then she would destroy the whole lot and she would create the composition that was in her mind. Quite often she would change things as she worked until she was satisfied, and we see this through these show up in X-rays. So we have these really two very interesting paintings which show how Frances thought, how she changed her mind about things. And I think this one, we see echoes of Cézanne. She was also influenced by Matisse and the fauves, they were called. She was influenced by Matisse. She was also known herself as a powerful colorist. She belonged to many of the advanced groups, artistic groups, and she had a huge influence over the young people painting at the time. As I said, she was poor. She suffered from duodenal ulcers because she didn't eat properly. She had chilblains and suffered dreadfully from the cold. But I think in this painting, and in many of her others, you see the joyful life that Frances led. She was inspired and motivated by her determination to paint and to become the best artist she could. And a lot of this pleasure and joy shows through in the work she's created, and I think particularly in this Wings Over Water, which is bright and sparkling and joyful, and really seems to express the inner Frances. Thank you.